Hi, I'm Jonathan Fields and this is Good Life Project. My guest today is Tami, the CEO and founder of a really amazing company called Sounds True, and we're here in Boulder filming with her. We're really going to dive deep into not only the company's journey, but her personal journey and how it's been sort of a dual evolution together. Awesome to be hanging out with you today.
Likewise.
Thank you. Hanging out in Boulder is, I've been one of my favorite places in the world. Hanging out with you, somebody who's built a company that's so well aligned with so many of my beliefs, but also has incredible impact in the world, and so aligned, and I guess an outgrowth of your personal exploration of meaning and purpose and power and passion and all these things in life. It's an incredible thing. I'd love to kind of take a step back with you, and I know the company is actually founded in 1985, here in Boulder too, right?
Yeah.
What was it? Tell me a little bit about what was going on in your life that sort of like started you down this road.
Yeah, well, so I'm 21 years old at the time, and I dropped out of college, and I dropped out of college because what I was interested in, which was and is the direct experience of mystical truths. I just felt that at the time at least, there wasn't really room in an academic setting to explore those kinds of topics, especially with a personal voice and personal discovery. And so I thought any mystic worth their salt would drop out of college. They wouldn't get a degree in mysticism.
Yeah.
And so
were there actually degrees? I mean,
no, I mean,
right,
I thought I was going to study philosophy. I was
right.
thrown into the religion department, and I could write abstract papers, but I couldn't actually get into what was really important to me. So I went to India, Sri Lanka, Nepal for a year, studied meditation, and when I came back, my parents begged me to finish my degree, but that just wasn't in me.
What was your background before this? How did you come up as a kid?
Grew up in Miami, Florida, to liberal Jewish parents, and very, very committed to education.
Right, of course.
And to providing a really good education for me. And I thought that I would study philosophy at college and maybe even become a philosophy professor. So, teenage kind of mind at that point.
So rabbi wasn't in the cards, though.
Rabbi wasn't in the cards, partially because the rabbi was an intermediary between people.
Yeah.
And I thought this whole idea of having any kind of intermediary was ridiculous, that it had to be about direct knowing. So no, I wasn't interested in being a rabbi. I thought the rabbi of our temple was a little bit like an actor. I was like, he's a little bit like an actor. He's, what's going on?
So you come from this place of a fairly traditional background, come into it. What leads you in the first place then to start saying, okay, I need to seek beyond sort of like this original faith that I came out of?
It was deeply unsatisfying. It wasn't answering any of the real questions that I had. So here I am, I'm in Swarthmore College, and there's a Buddhist religion professor who's there on a Fulbright scholarship for 1 year, Gunapala Dharmasiri, and he's teaching a class called Existentialism and Buddhist Philosophy, and I was like, I have to take that class. And he writes on the board the 3 marks of existence in Buddhist philosophy, and the 3 marks that everything's impermanent, that we suffer because we cling to things, so impermanent suffering, and then the mark of no self, that actually we're in flux, in fluid, that there's nothing solid that you can hold on to. And when I saw this, I was like, this is the first time that anyone ever spoke a language that communicated something to me, that explained my experience in a way that made sense. And then when I learned to meditate, I was like, and here is a technique, an approach that simply involves quieting the thinking mind and looking for oneself, actually seeing and touching and feeling for oneself. And so I had this deep sense of coming home, and not coming home to a path that was outside of me, but coming home to a way of relating directly to my own experience. And so I was so grateful for that.
So was meditation part of that original class also?
Yeah, yeah.
So there's integrated experience that kind of said, wow.
Well, when I left Swarthmore College, I left to go spend more time with him and his family in Sri Lanka.
So that was the year.
Yeah, I left after my sophomore year, and I called it, you know, like instead of a year abroad, a year inward, or something like that, you know.
So what came out of that year? What were the sort of awakenings or decisions?
Yeah, well, I mean, truthfully, what came out of that was a deeply disintegrated, and we could say even, I mean, confused wouldn't even be a strong enough word. I mean, I had touched something that was infinite and timeless, and I had no idea how to be a regular human person. So I came back and I only weighed 90 pounds.
Oh my God.
I'd basically stopped eating. I also had hepatitis. And this is the thing that really alarmed my mother in particular, I wasn't talking very much. And I wasn't talking because I thought that most of what people did when they spoke was fill up space, and that most people were talking because they were uncomfortable with the natural silence and space that's present. And I was like, I'm not gonna say anything unless there's actually something worth saying. Yeah, and I could probably use a little bit more of that in my life now. And it's a good, as I'm talking to you, I'm like, you should remember that, Tami. You talk all the time now. You know, now I fill space often to make other people feel comfortable.
Right.
You know, but at that age, as a 21-year-old, I was just like, I'm not gonna say anything unless there's, so my parents were terribly alarmed.
Were you a chatty kid before
situation. I was called Big Mouth when I was a kid, yeah.
So this is a major, major shift.
It was a pretty big shift, yeah.
That's funny. So where do you go from there? What do you do with this?
Well, when I came back and decided not to finish getting my degree, I wanted to understand psychology, meditation, what happened to me, basically. And so I came out to Boulder originally at age 21 to go to Naropa University, and I was going to study the psychology of meditation, something like that. But even then, there was something in me that just needed to leave academia and that approach to learning altogether with. And I just wanted to throw myself into life and to see what happened. And so I started waitressing, and my family said, that's fine, but we're not going to support you. And I thought, of course they shouldn't, you know, let me find my way. And soon after that, my father died. And when my father died, when I was 21, I inherited a small amount of money. And with that inheritance, I started Sounds True, and there's a lot to tell about how that happened and a lot of fortuitous events. But basically, while I was waitressing, I knew that that was not going to get me anywhere, and I was becoming more and more alienated and kind of desperate about my life. And I worked with a rebirther at the time who helped me come up with the following sentence about what was really in my heart and in my birth pattern for this incarnation, which was, God, I'm willing to do your work. Please show me what it is. So this was the prayer that I was saying again and again and again and again, really, you know, every hour, multiple times.
The sense of almost deep surrender.
Yeah, and that I wanted to be of service in some way, and that I would do whatever was asked of me, actually, as long as it was, you know, quote unquote, God's work.
So, well, a couple of questions. What is God's work, and how do you know which
so
is or isn't?
So it's, you know, unique to every person.
Yeah.
And so it could be anything, actually, for a person. So the question was really for me, what was the way that I would serve life? I would serve creation. So it wasn't, you know, what I mean by God's work, really, and even at the time I meant this, was that the manifest world is in so much trouble in so many ways. There's so much suffering in the world. How can I, given the skills and the education and the upbringing and all the privileges I've received, how can I help? What's the right role for me to play in that? And can I be shown it? And it was important to me to be willing, because I didn't want to be willful, and this comes into the surrender part that you mentioned. I didn't want to be willful. I didn't want to push through. But I also didn't want to be will-less. I didn't want to be like, I'm just sitting here like a dead lump. So it was like, you know, no, I'm willing. I actually have a lot of energy. I actually want to work really hard, actually. I have a lot to give, but I don't know where to direct it. But I think the prayer was a really important part of the entire opening of Sounds True, because I think it opened the field for all kinds of things to happen because there was a lot of sincerity in it.
So what things did happen? How did the sort of universe respond?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I had gotten involved in when I was at Swarthmore College was late night radio. So when I came out to Boulder, I volunteered at the local public radio station. And in addition to having a music program that was called the After Hours Audio Amazon, that was from midnight to 3 a.m., I also started an interview program. And the interview program was a chance for me to talk to spiritual teachers about their experience. And part of the motivation in that was that I wanted to continue the education that I felt had been interrupted in college. And I also just needed people to talk to. I mean, I had been through these very profound initiations and I had no idea how to make sense out of what had happened to me. And so I wanted to talk to people and I wanted to ask them questions. And so I thought I'll host this interview program. And what I found in hosting the interview program was that actually I felt much more on my seat doing that than I did spinning discs and being the radio DJ. There was something about being the radio DJ that had a slight quality of pretense in it. It wasn't a lot, but it was a little. And I could tell there was something in me that was kind of posing as this cool person. And I love music, so it wasn't a total facade. But there was, but when I did the interview show, I was suddenly totally natural. And it was because I was asking real questions and talking about things that were really alive
that mattered.
For me. Yeah. And so I was like, oh my God, this is something actually I love to do. And as part of hosting the interview show, I met and spoke with a very successful entrepreneur. And when I inherited this money from my father, about $50,000 when he died, I spoke to this gentleman and I said, I don't know what to do with this money. Should I put it in the bank or just sit there? Who knows where they'll invest it? They'll probably put it into the military-industrial complex in some way. That's terrible. I can't keep it under my pillow. You know, remember, I'm 21 years old. And I'm like, what should I do? And he said to me, why don't you put it into yourself? And I was like, excuse me? Like, well, yeah, if only I knew what to do. I mean, I'm waitressing, and what does that mean? I mean, it sounds good, but I have no idea. And he looked at me and he said, Tami, you know what you want to do. And I was like, huh, do I? I don't know if that's true or not. And then he said, come back in 3 days and we'll talk about it. And I walked out of his office. And, you know, he was a powerful and interesting person. So I think something had happened in the chemistry between us that I didn't really understand. But I walked out of his office and I suddenly felt like I wasn't quite walking on the ground in the same way, like something felt different in my body. And I'd been studying actually this idea of the felt sense in Jen Lin's work and how we know sometimes when something's true or important because we can feel it. So I was like, wow, talk about the felt sense. Everything feels really different inside of me. And then I heard these 3 words, disseminate spiritual wisdom. And it was a gift that came, those 3 words, disseminate spiritual wisdom. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And of course, this sounds very, you know, lofty. Well, what does that mean? How are you going to do this? And after I heard those words, then I started thinking about it. And I started thinking, well, should I do it through audio, through video, through books? And I already had a radio show, and people actually liked my interview program, so I sold 2 or 3 copies a week for $10 each on my home dubbing deck, my little cassette machine. And so I was like, well, why don't I start with audio? Because that's something I love. I have a dubbing deck at home, and people buy my interview shows. I'm ready. Well, I've got the infrastructure. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, so that's how I started.
That's incredible. Disseminate spiritual wisdom. I mean, it's interesting also because you get that message and you're doing the radio show in part because I guess you're enjoying it, but also because you're looking for these teachers or people to just continue the conversation that you had started.
Because I'm looking for people to help me. Yeah.
So you're, I guess, very early in your journey then. You're seeking and you're learning.
Yeah.
And then you make the decision to turn around and disseminate spiritual wisdom. Is there any sense in you that says, I'm 21 years old, who am I?
Well, I thought about it and I thought, you know, I have this small pile of money that's just a gift. And I'm basically unemployable. So let's also, that's an important point. I'm unemployable. and I'll try this for 2 years. And if it doesn't work, then I'll be in the same place of going to look for a job as I would be right now. So it's just, I'll do it as an experiment for 2 years, and I'll sort of let the karma of the situation unfold. I don't know if I had that language at the time, but I was like, let's just give it a go and see what happens. And if it's meant to grow and unfold, it will.
And meanwhile, you're still, it gives you this way to sort of like almost validate your continuing access, your continuing desire to find these people and have conversations and interview and share them. So what's the first format? Like what does the first Sounds True look like?
Well, so one of the things that I had seen is that people at the time were buying cassette copies from conferences and live events and workshops. And, you know, I'd seen these high-speed duplication.
At the right.
And I thought, well, I could do that. I could go and I could record teachers and make copies right on site. And first of all, this is a way I can attend workshops and trainings that otherwise I couldn't afford to go to. So I only did it for organizations and events where I wanted to be there, because this was my weekend. But this is what I wanted to do.
Right, exactly.
Because remember, I'm kind of a learning freak. I thought I was going to be a professor. I mean, I love learning. So the idea was like, great, I can go to these workshops and I don't have to pay. And I don't even have to participate, which I also liked. I liked being set aside with headphones on because I was a little nervous. Remember, you know, I'd gone to India and I was a strange person. So I got to sit in the back corner with headphones on and listen, and I didn't have to do some of these like turn to your partner. So I was like, this is a great setup. And I walk away at the end of the weekend with a wad of cash in my pocket because people have purchased on-site cassette recordings.
Yeah, so you're getting paid to learn in the way that you want to do it.
Exactly. So it was actually quite a good fit, and many of the teachers were happy to agree because I made just a very simple arrangement with them where they would get a copy of the submaster that I had recorded, and they could do whatever they want with it. And then I kept a copy, and then I gave them half of the proceeds once I covered my costs.
Got it.
Which were my time, which was really kind of free, but you know, exactly.
Estimated costs.
Exactly.
So that's how it really began. In your mind, when you're starting to do this, is this a company?
No.
What is it for you?
Right. So, you know, at about 5-6 years into running the business, someone from the local newspaper, the Boulder Daily Camera, interviewed me, and they said, you know, we're going to put this on the front page of this section in the newspaper. So when the newspaper came out, when the reporter mentioned it was going to come out, I immediately went to the lively arts section of the newspaper.
Because that's where it should be, right?
And it was on the beginning of the business section. And I was like, I'm in the business section. Oh my God.
Hey, you put me in the wrong section.
You know. And I think what I thought was that I was somehow working with art, education, and social change. Those were the themes that were in me. And the fact that it became a business, you know, was something that was then mentioned from the outside. And then over time, I started to get it, obviously. And I started to actually even get a business education through the doing of it, through the running of it.
Right. Did you find yourself, I mean, clearly you're drawn to the spiritual side of it and to the spiritual learning and the seeking.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself drawn to the learning on the business side too?
Well, you know, interestingly, just a very early thing I noticed when I was a waitress, and at one point the waitresses all had a meeting and they were like, let's pool our tips. And I was like, there is no way I'm going to pool my tips with the rest of you. You are slow, you're getting stoned in the bathroom. I'm like turning over half the tables and the customers love me. No way. And so I think that I'm a competitive person in athletics, and you know, bring a ball here and we can come up with any game, and you know, it just brings something out in me. So I think there's a part of me that's just very driven, and a lot of that transferred into the world of business, even though I didn't, you know, wasn't expecting that. And a lot of the learning actually came simply by necessity. I learned the most 15 years in the business when we started losing money, actually. When, it's a long story, but when the company had a terrible year and we lost a lot of money after being profitable for 15 years because we received our first line of credit from a bank, $1 million line of credit, and I wanted to expand into all of these different businesses, including a children's line and a video production line, and you know, suddenly I had to learn business planning skills, cash flow management skills, all kinds
a whole different set of skills.
Oh yeah. Right. And I was like, well, in order to do this, I'm going to have to learn a lot. And then I thought, it's just like learning anything. And it was so by necessity, I took it on.
Yeah. But there's something in you though that I'm sensing that says that I liked it.
Oh yeah, I've grown to actually really like it. Well, at first it was by necessity because I think probably the main thing I like is being independent.
Huge driver for a lot of people.
I like being independent, and I mean, I think I can say this in a way that I like being powerful, and I don't like being powerful at the expense of other people or exploiting other people, but I like the power to actualize something that I care about and to bring something out in the world. So in that sense, as an artist, I like the power of having a lot of paints available to me. I don't want to just paint in one color if I can. I want to paint in a lot of colors. And so being successful in business gives you more power to try more of these things and to do them in bigger and better ways. And I like that. I like having an impact and being influential. And that also comes with having resources that are available to you. So being successful in business, there's a lot of goodies that have motivated me to try to become good at it.
Yeah, I mean, which is so interesting also because we share a lot of similarities in terms of orientation, and that I have a very strong seeking and spiritual side, but I love being an entrepreneur also. And I like the business side of it, and I love the creative side, and I like the power side. I like the independence and the control, and I'm driven fundamentally by impact. But I found that to be a really rare blend in sort of this world, of seeking spirituality, disseminating, spiritual wisdom. To have something be, and it's not even it's a rare blend, but it's almost like an artist who says, I want to make a lot of money. So I owned a yoga studio in New York City for 7 years, and we trained a lot of yoga teachers. And when we got to the part of the training where, we said, okay, now here's how you can go out to the world and earn enough money to actually survive and thrive and flourish and still help a lot of people. Very big disconnect, because the mindset is, well, I'm here to serve. Who am I? And I've seen this in this business on a number of different levels.
So I think some of that, and I've thought a lot about this, is that deep within our spiritual background, many different spiritual traditions, is this idea that money should be kept separate from being a monastic. You shouldn't charge for the Dharma. You shouldn't charge for these things. They should be given. And the thing is, if you and I walked out of here in our monks' robes and our begging bowls, who knows in this society how successful we would be able to be. And so for me, part of it is just updating the file and updating our sense of what does it mean to be a spiritually devoted person living in the world today. And I mean, monastics were also not sexual, and I mean, and they didn't touch money. So this is a different way of being a deeply devoted person. And so I've had to look deeply. Is there anything about making money that actually corrupts my soul or is anti-dharmic or anything like that? Really? And of course there would be if I wasn't treating my employees fairly, and if I wasn't paying them fairly. But if I wasn't, I wouldn't have a very successful company, because the best people wouldn't want to work for me. So that's not going to work, and also not what's in my heart. And if I was overcharging our customers, that would be a problem too. Or selling them false material. So none of that's okay. So if I'm acting in integrity and I'm working with my employees fairly, and I'm paying our authors a generous royalty on their products, so everybody in the ecosystem is benefiting, and I'm part of that ecosystem, and I'm also financially successful, then what's the problem?
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I mean, we're one on that. But what's interesting, I think that's still, in that world that you exist in, and I partly still exist in, that's not the common mindset. And it's just interesting. And I would have all these conversations with people saying, if you can't pay your rent doing this thing that you say you're here to do, and you really want to make a difference, then that means that you're going to have to stop doing it entirely to find something else to pay your rent. So how are you serving?
Yeah.
If that's, you know, so you have got to build, you know, a certain amount, you know, I'll use the word wealth, but not in terms of riches, but just enough of a business sort of, you know, like sensibility and enough of revenue stream and all these things to be okay in the world.
Yeah.
To support your ability to go out there and help other people, or else you can't do it.
Yeah.
You know, and there's still a disconnect. There's still something in a lot of people's minds that says, so like you said, we're living in such a different world than the world that a lot of these traditions evolved out of.
Yeah.
You know, that the lens that we sort of see them through in terms of how they need to come to life and sustain us needs to evolve too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you reach a point where the company starts to go beyond just back of the room recordings and events.
Yeah.
And how does it evolve sort of like from there into?
So we had accumulated this archive of live recordings, and after about 3 years, I met someone who became my business partner for 14 years. And he looked at this wall that I had that had all these cassette masters on them. And he said, "You're sitting on a gold mine." And I said, "No, it's a bunch of cassette masters. I don't know if it's really a gold mine." And he said, "No, it's a gold mine." And he's like, "We need to take these audio recordings of workshops and conferences and package them individually, create a package, and treat them each like they're a standalone information product, kind of like they're a book, but they're a recording. And create a catalog, and we'll put them all in a catalog, and it will be all of these recordings for people who don't have access."
Right.
And I was like, well, if you're going to do that, I was like, I want to edit the recordings, because a lot of them have a lot of extraneous announcements, and you know, they were never
just
designed.
Live recordings,
yeah.
Right, yeah.
So they have to be edited. So that's how he and I started working together. And he designed the covers, wrote the package copy, and created a catalog. And I created the relationships with the authors and went out and recorded things and then edited the programs. And together we launched the Sounds True catalog. And within about a year or two of working with each other, we grew a business that was grossing about $1 million. And then by the time we hit 14, 15 years of working together, we had a business that was grossing more like $10 million. And he earned 20% of the company, because in the beginning years, I really couldn't afford to pay him anything.
So that's an
and so that was his sweat equity arrangement.
So, I mean, the company really evolves in such an organic way.
Yeah. Boulder organic.
Yeah, no, exactly. And are you sort of like pulled at any point to leave Boulder?
Well, you know, I just came back just yesterday from spending a week in Mill Valley and spending time in
I love
California.
Mill Valley too.
So,
it's almost like Boulder on the water.
Yeah, and with the redwood trees.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
You know, so I had some moments, but you know, I have roots here, and now, you know, 90 employees and a whole situation, and so that's not happening in the near future, no, but there are plenty of places in the world that I want to make sure I spend good time in.
So let's talk about this evolution also into employer.
Yeah.
Because that's got to be really interesting, moving from a place of somebody who's on a path on the spiritual side, somebody who very organically, almost inadvertently, finds her way into this world of business and entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And then the dynamic of managing people.
Yeah.
What's that like for you as you're sort of exploring this journey?
So when I first started, again, you know, I'm 22 years old at this point, I thought, well, I'll be paid the same amount and we'll figure everything out and we'll like sit in a circle together.
Yeah.
You know, and what I got early on was that actually that didn't work for other people. Other people said, would you just be the leader? Would you just take charge?
Yeah, that makes sense.
We need someone to be the decision maker and the leader. And I was like, oh, actually the only way that, one, we're going to get anything done, and two, everybody's going to relax in this situation, is if I step into a strong leadership role. Okay, I'm going to do that. And what I noticed is that the more I do that, the more everybody actually, it's like magnetic filings or something, files in and finds their place, and we can accomplish so much, and we have team. And the team needs a leader, actually. And so I actually feel quite comfortable being an employer at this point. I mean, I had to learn how to fire people well and to go through that process. So that was a pretty big learning for me.
I never liked that.
Yeah, it's not something to like, although at the same time...
It's necessary.
I feel a lot more neutral about it now than I ever have, and have learned lots of ways to just communicate authentically from my heart the truth of the situation. And this is actually what's true both for the business and in my perception, and what's needed. And that's what we're all doing here. And then to treat people really fairly and generously in the exit. Yeah.
Yeah. We one of the first interviews that we did, maybe it was the first interview, was actually friends of ours who own Kindle Cafe in New York City, Bart Potenza and his wife. But we were talking to Bart, and we're talking about people moving on because they have this tremendously successful restaurant group that's very personal, very passion built, and very on purpose, and people that are family. But people leave.
Yeah.
And he used this beautiful term. He said, like when it came time, he said, he would bless them on. Yeah. That was a beautiful way of looking at this.
Yeah.
There's no anger, there's no angst. Even if like the reason for them partying wasn't the most pleasant reason, it's like, you know what, we're human beings. Yeah. For some reason, this wasn't a fit. I wish you no will. Yeah. And I'm blessing you on to whatever whatever it is that you need in your life. I thought it was a really nice way to look at that transition within an organization, which is often pretty angsty on both sides. Yeah. You, at some point, when you start to have more and more and more employees, do you start to think about culture at all?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I think the core idea that I had early on, and it leads to the culture conversation, was a very simple idea, which is that I wanted to treat people the way that I would want to be treated if I were an employee. Really simple. And so I like a lot of flexibility. I'm not the kind of person, I can't fit into a box. So it's like, how flexible can I be with the people who work for me? Right. I like to bring forth a lot of my own voice and intensity. And so how can I make sure that there's room for people? I like to be casual and lie down when I need to lie down, and take my shoes off, and all kinds of things. So when it came to the culture of Sounds True, I opened it up to see what other people really wanted to bring forward. And it's just interesting, when you let people kind of do their thing, they naturally create a culture. So for example, someone in the company said, we want to have a softball team. Great, will you pay half for the shirts? Yeah, sure, I'll pay half, no big deal. Sounds True, we'll pay half. We want to have a pajama day at the company. I'm like, what are you talking about? We're all going to wear our pajamas to work? Oh my God, this is going to be so much fun. And I'm like, does it cost anything? Will you buy cereal? Will the company buy? Okay, let's see it. And now it's become an institution. I think we've had like 10 years of pajama day parties. Someone else said, I'd like to have a meditation room. And I'm like, well, why? And they're like, well, you meditate if you want in your office, but I have a cubicle. And so I don't feel comfortable sitting and meditating in my cubicle. I think it gets weird attention. So can't we have a room that's dedicated to this? Well, of course we can. And so right now, the art director is putting on an interesting art salon where people are going to bring in photographs of themselves when they were in high school and put it up all over the building. I mean, Yeah. So I mean, the culture has actually, giving space has actually allowed people's individual creativity to come forward to build the culture.
Yeah, and I guess a big part of that has got to be also picking the right people for the organization. Because if you pick people who aren't well aligned and then allow them to say, okay, this is what I need, then the things that they'll start to bring into their requests, their needs, won't be well aligned. Yeah. And if that starts to manifest in the culture, then it starts to create energy, like holes.
Well, one of the things that, now Sounds True's been around now for 28 years, so one of the things I've seen is that it's like an organism. So it itself, Sounds True itself, either accepts or rejects people. And that happens usually in the first few months of a new person being hired. And so we do our best, of course, as you're saying, to hire people who we think will be a good cultural fit. So we try. Right. But then what I now completely trust is that the organism that is Sounds True will eject people
Interesting.
who are not the right fit. And it will eject them because they'll just decide to quit, and they'll say, I don't feel comfortable here. And I mean, one person who worked at the company for a few weeks said, everybody's running around asking me how I'm feeling, and I don't want to talk about how I'm feeling. Like, it's none of their business how I'm feeling. I don't want to do that. She's like, I'm happy to work for you, Tami, from home, but I cannot come in to this, you know, probing interior investigation into my soul in the workplace. And I was like, yeah, you know, it's probably just not the right place for you. That's fine. It's wonderful. You know, no worries. I bless you. Great. But, you know, she came to this on her own pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think, I don't know if they still do it, but at Whole Foods, for a long time, somebody would get, when you were hired there, you would get a job, but I'll use the word probation, but I'm sure that's not what they actually called it. But you would get assigned to a team, and then it was either like 30 or 60, 90 days that the team would basically get to vote on whether you were a good contributor to the team and to the culture. And they had a huge amount of input on whether you stayed after that. I mean, obviously you get to choose also, but only if basically like the team there really felt like you were part of the family.
And I think that's happening whether we articulate it or not.
I totally agree. I mean, that's formalized, but but I think also so much of it again is having a vision that's well formed, a founder who's still very involved. And I wonder if also, you know, sometimes you start to see the cultures shift away and start to be almost destructive when somebody who's, maybe doesn't have to be the founder, but somebody who buys really deeply into the same vision and purpose and why as the founder. So maybe, you know, you can hire those people along the way and really make sure they're well aligned and you know, let them have their own beliefs and purpose within the organization, but also really understand what you're about, what it's about, so they can keep that propagating through over years and years and years. And I think I've seen that's where, you know, people fall short a lot of times and things really go off the rails within culture and organization. So you mentioned that you reach a point at around 15 years in where something goes wrong. So what happened there?
Well, up until that point, my basic approach had been, don't spend money you don't have. Pretty good sound advice when you're starting a company, at least I thought so in the mid-'80s. And so Sounds True was profitable year after year, and we took the profits and reinvested them in the company and kept growing. And then at a certain point, I think I was just kind of like, wow, this is all sort of working. Let's really grow, let's really grow this business. We can do it. We could expand into all these different areas, and maybe I need an investor. And then people said to me, well, Tami, the best investor is the bank. Just go create a relationship with the bank, and they'll, you know, give you a line of credit, and you can use that to grow your business. And I was like, aha, great, okay. Go to the bank, and the bank's happy, actually, to give me a line of credit. Although at the time, the banker says to me, where's your CFO? And I was like, I don't have a CFO. And she was like, well, you know, we're about to give you $1 million line of credit, and, you know, I think we'd feel more secure if you had a CFO in place. And I was like, look, you can look at our performance over the last several years. If you don't want to give me a line of credit, I'll go to another bank that does. Well, I should have taken her advice, the banker's advice, but I was stubborn and, you know.
It's like, we're a good business. We don't need that.
You know, and so then we had our first line of credit. And I was like, okay, we have $1 million to work with. We'll put this money here. We'll put this money here. We'll do these different, grow these different divisions. But there was no plan in place for when they would start bringing cash back in. And so it was only, you know, 6-9 months into this experiment where it was suddenly like, Tami, you actually don't know what you're doing. And you're digging some holes that you don't even see your way out of. And there are different distribution channels that relate to children's audio than spoken word audio for adults. And, you know, you don't know what you're doing. And so I had to just like pull the emergency brake. And at this point also, this was when my partner of 14 years was like, look, we brought it to this point. We're not really business people. Why don't we just sell the company and get out? Why try to develop all of this, you know, growth strategy?
So around what time is this then?
So we're around 1999, 2000, 2001.
So, and also like right around then, spiritual media and yoga media and all this stuff is getting pretty hot.
It was. And so, you know, and so he very much wanted me to sell the business. And I thought, maybe I should, maybe I should. Also, I was exhausted trying to run all these new things.
And after having a brutal year.
Yeah, not knowing what I was doing. And so that was an interesting fork in the road. And I talked to several different potential buyers. And actually nobody felt like the right fit. And nobody was offering a substantial sum of money either. So there were both of those things that were a problem. But there was one buyer that could have worked out. And then I met the woman who's become my partner. Her name's Julie. And I met Julie, and she's quite an intuitive person. And she said, I'm getting a very clear message that you're not supposed to sell your company. And I said, well, who's ever giving you the message can come and run it then.
Let's go one step beyond the message. Give me a body here.
And she's like, well, she's like, I think you need to relate differently, but not necessarily sell it, and let other people do more and change your role, because you've built this whole business kind of around you. And in order for it to grow and thrive and prosper, you need to step back and let other people do things. And I tried that, and the business started really growing more and more as I stepped back and gave responsibility to other people.
And was your original partner out of the picture now, or was
No,
he still?
And then when he discovered that I wasn't going to sell it, I made an arrangement with him to buy him out over 5 years. And so I was like, look, I'm not going to sell it. I never started the business with any promise to you. This was never part of our deal.
And he's a 20% holder at this point, right?
Yeah. And so I bought his shares out over a period of time. And my relationship with the company changed, and things started working again. Yeah.
Did you find also at that point, I mean, you must have been a little bit burnt out after that year too.
Yeah.
Were you happy to change that relationship at that point?
I think I was wildly and am wildly in love with Julie. And so I think some of it was I was just like, oh my God, everything's kind of changing. Yeah. I now have this intense interest in love and relationship. And I took the business to a certain point, and then it actually stopped being fulfilling. Felt a little bit like I was grinding something out and kind of going against a river versus going with a river. Whereas this was a whole new sense of flow with my partner. And so I felt relieved, and grateful to invest instead in the relationship and resting a bit and just sort of letting the business go and seeing what would happen.
Yeah, and I guess, in turn, that was best for you, and it seems like the best for the company also.
Yeah, I think so.
Which is, I think, the way that, sometimes when we just create enough space to step back and listen, or have somebody from the outside looking in who can see a little bit more clearly, say, hey, I invite you to explore this. That's like, it can be the catalyst, and all of a sudden we're like, well, yeah. I'm curious too, so now as the company is moving forward and the world of media has evolved in a pretty profound way just in the last 5 years.
Last 5 minutes.
Yeah, right. I mean, what are you feeling about sort of like the business and the company these days?
So, I mean, Sounds True has gone through so many different phases. Phases of hardship and struggle, phases where the culture has been actually quite compromised, and phases of sweetness and beauty and flow, and that sense where you're just like, oh my God, I can't believe how all the pieces are falling together. So right at this very moment in time, we're in a sweet spot. And I feel really happy about that. Between 2009 and 2012, it was a pretty rough go. And I think we were reinventing so many new businesses.
Well, everyone in this space was this mass upheaval. Yeah,
and they weren't yet getting traction, but we had to keep investing in them while we were propping up our old business. And it was a really stressful slog. But I feel now like we've come out the other side. I have a new team, a new leadership team at the company, and some of the people who are in those roles have so much energy and enthusiasm, and we're working together in an incredibly harmonious and high energy way. And I also see a lot of input from the outside world that wants to contribute to Sounds True's success and expansion, and so it's just a really fabulous time right now.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, it's such an amazing time in the world of media, in the world of, in this growing conversation around consciousness and media and business. Huge amount of disruption, but also a huge amount of opportunity. And I think a lot of people are at a point where they see it, but they have to decide whether they want to lean into it again or for the first time, because there's no clear direction to success right now. So you know that you have to a certain extent, play the role of the pioneer and create the next generation, the next evolution. And some people want to own that, and some people don't, but I think it's kind of a fascinating place to be.
Yeah.
So the name of this project is the Good Life Project.
Yeah.
And you know, you've lived an extraordinary life and have a lot more extraordinary living to do and built an extraordinary business. When I offer that phrase to you, to live a good life, what comes up?
There's something about the word good that just touches my heart. So when I hear the word good life, good, I notice that my heart softens and opens, and I want to be around goodness. I want to be goodness. So I love that. And then a good life, well, you know, for me, I think a good life is a life of heartful connection and heartful contribution and service. Those are the kinds of things, and creativity that come up for me with what is a good life. And I think of the quality of relatedness being probably the most important thing to me. So I love the name of your project. It touches me.
Thanks. Yeah, beautiful answer. There is no wrong answer, but yeah, it's an interesting exploration. And I love the fact that, like I said earlier, I've never yet heard the same answer to that question.
Yeah.
Everyone has such a personal expression of how they would experience it. So I thank you so much for the conversation today. It's been so enjoyable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm Jonathan Fields, and my guest today has been Tami, CEO and founder of Sounds True, signing off for Good Life Project.